In 1919, the victors of World War I gathered in Versailles to shape the peace. But behind the gilded doors and ceremonial speeches, another game was being played. One not of peace, but of profit, power, and punishment. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't just a document, it was a dagger, slowly pressed against the throat of a nation already brought to its knees. Germany was forced to accept full responsibility for the war, crushed beneath impossible reparations, stripped of its colonies, starved of resources. But here's the twist. What if this wasn't an accident? What if the suffering wasn't a byproduct, but a product itself, crafted with surgical precision by a handful of powerful financiers, industrialists, and imperial strategists? Bankers in London and New York quietly profited from rebuilding the very economies they helped destroy. Politicians drew borders across Africa and the Middle East with rulers, not care, splitting tribes and fueling future conflicts. And in back rooms, secret notes were passed about oil, railways, and debt. Peace wasn't the goal. Leverage was. The broken German Republic became a powder keg. Resentment simmered. Desperation festered. And in the shadows, the puppet masters watched. They knew. Desperate people make dangerous choices. And all it would take was one charismatic firebrand with a promise, a uniform, and a vendetta to light the match they'd spent years preparing. This is not the story told in textbooks. This is the story whispered through ledgers and lost telegrams. A story of how peace was poisoned at its birth and how the war to end all wars was designed to return. His name was Adolf Hitler, once a failed painter, a homeless drifter on the streets of Vienna. In another life, he might have died nameless, another lost soul of the First World War. But fate had a different stage for him. And so did the men in the shadows. Germany in the 1920s was a nation on its knees, starving, humiliated, and boiling with rage. And when a wounded country cries out for salvation, the loudest voice, not the wisest, is often the one they follow. Hitler gave them that voice. But the question is, did he find his platform, or was it built for him? He didn't rise alone. Behind every rally, behind every flaming torch and swastika banner, were backers, bankers, media moguls, and industrialists who saw in Hitler something, they called it the stab in the back myth, a lie that Germany hadn't lost the war but been betrayed from within. It wasn't true. But truth didn't matter. What mattered was how it could be weaponized. Hitler didn't invent this lie, he perfected it. And the men funding him printed it. Soon the Nazi Party wasn't a fringe movement, it was a machine. Propaganda flowed like wine. Enemies were named. Jews, communists, intellectuals. Parliament was dissolved. Democracy dismantled. And still, many cheered. But here's the part history books often soften. Hitler didn't seize power. He was handed it, legally. Through backroom deals, elite endorsements, and a fearful public who thought they could control him. They were wrong. And those who tried to speak out? Journalists, union leaders, professors, they vanished. Some fled. Others were dragged away at night, never to be seen again. The monster had found his stage. And the world, still weary from the last war, was too tired to look closely at the script he was writing. The dictator did not rise by force. He rose by invitation, with a smile. August 23rd, 1939. Two of the most bitter enemies in the world made an unlikely agreement, a pact that would send shockwaves across Europe and change the course of history. The Nazi-Soviet Pact, an alliance of convenience, some would call it. A non-aggression treaty between Adolf Hitler's Germany and Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union. To the outside world, it seemed absurd. Two ideologies, so diametrically opposed, now sitting together like old friends. Fascism and communism at peace? But in the shadows, something darker was unfolding. This was not simply a political maneuver. It was a chess match played with lives, nations, and secrets. Both Hitler and Stalin were playing roles, feeding the world a story that would make them appear like willing partners. In Berlin, Hitler's men weren't just preparing for a war. They were already working with Stalin's spies, funneling money and arms and creating backdoor deals that would benefit both sides when the time was right. At the same time, in Moscow, Stalin's operatives were quietly sowing seeds of sabotage, planning to turn on the Germans when they least expected it. And deep within this web of intrigue, a Soviet diplomat, Nikolai, was sent on a dangerous mission to Berlin to secure the details of this pact. But the moment he met her, Marta, a beautiful and intelligent German spy, everything changed. What was meant to be a covert exchange of information quickly turned into something far more dangerous, an affair. Marta had been planted in Berlin to seduce and manipulate Soviet officials, to uncover their deepest secrets. But as she and Nikolai spent more time together, she found herself torn. He wasn't just another pawn in the game, he was real. And his loyalty, was it to the Soviet Union or to her? In the swirling chaos of a world on the brink of war, love had no place. Or so they thought. Nikolai, now hopelessly in love with Marta, learned something he wasn't supposed to know. In one of their secret meetings, she handed him a document, one that would change the course of the coming invasion. It was a list of targets, critical infrastructure that Stalin had promised Hitler in exchange for a safe border. But what Marta didn't know, what neither of them could have known, was that the Soviets had already planned to betray their new ally. Music intensifies. Cut to a night of tension and danger, Nikolai being hunted by his own comrades. In that moment, Nikolai faced a choice: expose Marta's betrayal and risk his own life, or protect her and risk the collapse of Soviet strategy. What neither of them realized was that while their hearts burned with passion and deception, a much larger betrayal was unfolding on the European stage. Fade to black, the sound of a ticking clock echoing in the silence. The Nazi-Soviet pact was more than a diplomatic agreement. It was a time bomb. It wasn't just about Poland. It was about positioning, about secrets that would tear the world apart. And in the hearts of those who swore loyalty to both sides, it was already too late to undo the damage. Spring, 1940. France, proud, cultured, battle-scarred from the First World War, believed its fortresses would hold. They were wrong. Hitler didn't march through the old gates. He simply walked around them, through the forests, through Belgium, and in 6 short weeks, France collapsed. It wasn't just a defeat. It was a humiliation. A nation that had once defined revolution now surrendered without one. The world watched in disbelief and in fear. But not everyone bowed. One man refused to accept it. His name was Charles de Gaulle, a relatively unknown general, a stubborn voice in the chaos. While his government surrendered, he fled. But he didn't just take his conviction, he carried something else. A briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. Inside it, a code book. Not just any code book, this one, torn from the blood-stained uniform of a dying Nazi officer during the final skirmish outside Reims. The codebook hinted at something massive, Hitler's next step. Not just against France, but against all of Western Europe. But the book was incomplete. One page, the final sequence, was missing. Without it, the intel was worthless. That page, hidden by a fallen comrade, was believed lost in occupied Paris. But one woman knew where it was. Camille, a librarian by day, resistance courier by night, fluent in code, trained in seduction, feared by the Gestapo. She'd already lost a brother to the war. She wasn't about to lose her country. She set out to retrieve the missing page, hidden in the binding of an old novel buried deep inside a Nazi-controlled archive. But to reach it, she would have to pass through the very heart of collaborationist Paris, a city now filled with enemies wearing French uniforms. Back in London, de Gaulle stands alone before a BBC microphone. On June 18, 1940, Charles de Gaulle addressed the world from London. His voice, calm but defiant, declared that France had lost a battle, but not the war. Few heard it that night. Fewer believed it. But Camille did. And she was already bleeding to make that promise true. By the time de Gaulle finished speaking, Camille was already on the run. The final page clutched to her chest, Nazi boots behind her. She would either deliver the key to unravel Hitler's Western strategy or die with it. This was more than a war of armies. It was a war of whispers, of ink and blood, of women and men who carried nations in their fists and hope in their hearts. France had fallen, but the flame had not gone out. And somewhere in the fog between London and Paris, a resistance was rising. To the world, Winston Churchill was the bulldog, the roaring lion who refused to kneel. His speeches stirred nations. His image was defiance personified. But behind the words, behind the scotch and cigars, was a man playing a game far more dangerous than anyone knew. Cut to dimly lit war rooms, maps filled with red pins, chalkboards scrawled with code names. Churchill didn't just lead battles, he staged illusions, crafted lies so convincing they'd become truth. And the chessboard wasn't just Europe, it was the hearts and minds of millions. His pawns, spies, diplomats, lovers, traitors, sometimes all at once. Britain was on fire, literally. German bombers reduced cities to rubble nightly, yet somehow morale held. Why? Because Churchill made it so. He bent truth when he had to, and sometimes he broke it. Unknown to the public, Churchill was engaged in covert negotiations, not just with allies, but with enemies. His agents reached deep into Nazi territory, striking deals with double agents, bribing officials, even blackmailing high-ranking German officers who had secrets to hide. Not every alliance was clean, but every move had purpose. One of his most trusted operatives, known to the inner circle only as Gideon, was deep undercover inside Berlin. A master of disguise, fluent in 5 languages and a ghost in enemy territory. But even ghosts can falter. Dramatic pause. A piano note hangs. Gideon had fallen in love. She was the daughter of a powerful German general, brilliant, mysterious, and perhaps not entirely loyal to her father's cause. But love is the ultimate liability. And Churchill knew it. When word reached London that Gideon had gone silent for 2 days, the war room froze. Was he compromised? Was she a spy? Was he... Churchill faced the most impossible of wartime equations. Let Gideon's mission collapse, risking the exposure of a dozen sleeper cells across Europe. Or cut him loose. Bury the story, and let love be the casualty. What Churchill did next remains classified in many files. But what we do know is this. Days later, the London press reported a bombing that never happened. A fabricated event. A ghost story meant to cover a vanished man. The public cheered Churchill's strength. The newspapers wrote of defiance. But in the halls of power, a secret was sealed. One life sacrificed to preserve the lie that could win the war. Fade to black. Echo of Churchill's voice. In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. Would you like to continue with topic 6, or revise or deepen this segment in another way? December 7th, 1941. A date that would live in infamy, but also in doubt. Because what if Pearl Harbor wasn't just a surprise attack, but a silent decision? A betrayal buried so deep, it was written in code and never meant to be found? Japan's assault was brutal, precise, devastating. Over 2,400 Americans killed in less than 2 hours. Battleships sunk. Aircraft destroyed. And in the aftermath, a grieving, enraged nation united in war. But behind the patriotism, a question lingered. Why weren't we ready? In the weeks before the attack, U.S. cryptographers picked up strange signals. Japanese fleet movements that didn't fit the usual patterns. Ambassadors calling home in coded panic. Even British intelligence whispered that something was coming. But the U.S. Pacific Fleet stayed docked. Radios stayed quiet. And radar operators were told to ignore the blips on their screens. While combing through wreckage days later, Lieutenant Hale discovered something strange. A water-damaged satchel belonging to a Navy analyst stationed at Pearl. Inside, a torn transcript. A message decoded 2 days before the attack. A message warning of a potential strike, marked defer, await authorization. What if the president knew? What if Roosevelt, haunted by the economic collapse, desperate to unite a divided nation, saw no other way to wake the sleeping giant than to let it be struck first? Publicly, Pearl Harbor was an outrage. Privately, it may have been a gambit. Now Hale is on the run. A quiet man, grieving, confused, holding a document that could unravel everything. He tried to alert his superiors. The memo vanished. He was reassigned to a remote station in Alaska, but Hale made copies, mailed them to newspapers. No one published them. Years later, whispers of his findings surfaced, only to be drowned in red tape and accusations of conspiracy. This is the story that haunts the Pacific, not just of torpedoes and burning oil, but of silence. Calculated, deliberate silence. Because maybe, just maybe, the attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't the beginning of war. It was the price of admission. Stalingrad, a name etched in blood and frost. It wasn't just a battle, it was a siege. A reckoning. Over 2 million men and women clashed in a frozen hell where bullets weren't always the deadliest weapon. And love became the ultimate betrayal. She was a legend, a ghost. Over 100 confirmed kills. Her face painted on propaganda posters. Her name whispered in Nazi trenches. But Anya didn't care about medals. Her brother was killed at Kursk. Her fiancé vanished at Leningrad. Now she hunted with one purpose: vengeance. That's when she found him. A wounded man buried under broken stone. Blonde, blue-eyed. In a tattered Wehrmacht uniform. She should have killed him. She had done it before. But something stopped her. The man groans, reaches for a notebook, not a weapon. He passes out. His name was Elias Bauer, a German officer, yes, but not just any soldier. He carried something far more dangerous than a rifle. He carried secrets. Inside his blood-stained notebook were encrypted coordinates, fallback positions, supply caches, and something else. A strategy, Hitler's contingency plan if Stalingrad fell. Montage. Anya nursing him in secret, hiding him beneath floorboards, reading his notes by candlelight, struggling to interpret the codes, torn between duty and something she thought she had buried long ago. At first it was guilt, then curiosity, then something neither of them dared name. As her comrades froze and starved in the ruins above, Anya protected the enemy beneath. But every choice has a price. Anya knew time was running out. She could deliver Elias to command, hand over the notebook, and become a hero. The war might be ending, but the world would never be the same. Fade to Ezra alone in a hospital bed. The government erased Lillian. The Soviets got their bomb anyway. The world split into two ideologies, both with fingers on the same red button. In the end, the Manhattan Project didn't just split the atom. It split marriages, morals, and time itself. The war ended, but the gamble had only just begun. September 2nd, 1945. The world celebrates. Nazi Germany is crushed. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. Peace, finally, has come. But history is never so simple. Sometimes peace is just a costume, a fragile mask stretched over a face still twisted in conflict. The Allies stood together on the battlefield, but in victory, old loyalties vanish. The Soviet Union tightens its grip on Eastern Europe. The West responds in kind. Berlin, once the symbol of liberation, becomes the front line in a new, invisible war. A Cold War, not declared but undeniable. Inside is a contract, signed by industrialists, bankers, and politicians from multiple countries. A secret economic alliance, crafted years before the first tank crossed into Poland. Its goal, not global conquest, but global restructuring. A world war. By design. What if World War II wasn't just a clash of empires, but an orchestrated disaster? A blueprint for power realignment? For profit? For control? The victors wrote the history books, but some truths were too dangerous to print, so they were buried, along with the bodies. It lists names, companies, codes. But the most chilling thing? A phrase written at the bottom. The next war will not need bullets, only belief. From the ashes of Nagasaki rose two giants, capitalism and communism, locked in a chess match played across continents. Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, Iran. Not the peace we were promised, but the continuation of conflict by other means. Yes, World War II ended, but peace was just the next battlefield. And as the world rebuilt with one hand, it rearmed with the other. Because maybe, just maybe, the war that changed everything never truly ended.